Welcome to our interview series on Technology Impact Assessment, otherwise known as TIA. My name is Katina Michael. I'm a visiting scientist at Arizona State University and also a Social Cyber Institute Fellow. This interview is part of the Australia-India Joint Impact Assessment of Critical Technologies for Peace and Stability project, funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and also our counterpart in India. And the project's been ongoing since November 2024, reaching its conclusion this year in November 2025. In this series, we are focusing on technology impact assessment for peace and stability, and it gives me absolute pleasure to introduce to you today Dr. Jaya Pillai. Welcome, Jaya.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You
Thanks for
too.
having me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And a bit of background on Jaya. He is an AI and strategic policy foresight consultant, where he applies his passion for matching data and strategy towards product development. As a seasoned economist and strategist, he offers strategic business and economic advisory to small and medium enterprises and also international NGOs. He's also the former dean of several universities and business schools in Central Asia, where he established research centers and expanded the interdisciplinary research and pedagogic activities of business schools in areas of artificial intelligence, state building, social entrepreneurship, and design thinking. Also, what's your disciplinary background more specifically?
Yeah, I hold a PhD from the Australian National University in economics and public policy. Wonderful experience on learning and bringing in these core values of how to actually use skills in public arena, right? And that's where public policy, public administration come into the picture. What was interesting in the world was going through a massive change. Being an economist, being a policy strategist guy, I worked a lot on data. And at the pandemic period, there was a emphasis on using data, right? AI was exploding. The pandemic kind of created a chain reaction. And that's when I realized, hey, why not jump into AI, right? And that's where I had another learning experience, right? Because I love learning and adapting and went into AI, learned machine learning, AI applications, and that opportunity led me to go into the public sector heavily in banking industry, and that's where I was the head of the data science team, built products. At the same time, incorporated this learning into my teaching in my academic experience itself. So my interdisciplinary was just not focusing in one area, but it brought me into a more broader applicative kind of a scenario itself. So that's why it's interesting the way I brought about my career itself.
Well, I think that's magnificent. I totally understand the language you're talking about and the reasoning behind it.
Mhm.
You've also got here, it says a certificate in designing and building AI products and services from MIT.
Yes.
Um, when was this? I mean, when did you see the opening for AI, that AI was going to make a huge impact on the world? When was that?
This was about 2 years ago. I realized a lot of them, uh, there was a big buzz about AI. But one of the problems in this buzzword is that they don't know that AI is just a tool, right? And this
Hmm.
tool is used to do what they need to do so that people our society becomes more efficient, effective, and a lot more steadier. Unfortunately, the development of AI and the way AI has been designed, a lot of them didn't understand, right? And there was issues about more so-called the so-called what you call disadvantages of AI starting to prop up in the scene, right? There was a lot of scamming, a lot of the in fact, the use of Chat GPT became a lot more prominent. But what purpose, right? So this is what took me aside and say, hey, I want to know what exactly goes behind the design of such things, right? How the right questions are put forward so that
Hmm.
the design a product it is actually enhancing the living standards of society, the living standards of people, the work ethics of people, as opposed to understanding just the tool and that's about it, right? And this is what's happening in the current generation. They're using it blindly. So I wanted to get the nitty-gritty of what exactly goes behind the scenes. And that's why I went to MIT to actually take this certificate in designing, using AI to design products itself. So that's how it came about.
You know, I've seen the relationship of economics with technology,
Yeah.
particularly when we look at technical change and evolutionary economic theory. Here,
Mhm.
you also touched on public policy in your studies and government orientations. Um, it doesn't surprise me, but there are few people with this specific skill set venturing in from economics to technology, but it goes hand in hand. Can you make a comment about the relationship between technology and economics?
Uh, Simple, right? Public administration exists to develop policies, right? And when you start to develop policies, civil service basically wants to actually enhance standard of living, economic growth, socio-economic perspective. Now, when technology comes into the picture, starts to creep in, what
Hmm.
happens? How do you handle that? Right? Civil servants are not catered for that. And just came back from a keynote speech and conference and workshop in Uzbekistan, which is the national conference, UN conference, in fact, because I work with them. So the main theme is how do civil servants skilled up to meet AI demands, right?
Hmm.
And coming from a public policy scenario, this is a big gap, right? Civil servants are unable to do it. So this is why the whole intersections come into the picture, because as technology and the services which come out of technology is exponentially rising, civil servants are unable to keep up with it. So the intersection is because the development of technology was so exponential,
Hmm.
governments and civil servants are unable to keep up. So there is now a concerted effort for civil servants, new employees in the civil service, to go through such training so that when policies, e-services are
Hmm.
undertaken, there is consistency. And furthermore, there's a bit of control in the way such services are undertaken, simply because there are more bets about AI than goods.
Yes.
So that is the reason why my interest was actually to understand the innovative part of the story and how this innovation could be brought into a public administration services sector itself.
Fantastic. I know a good friend of mine, Patrick Mikolev, is doing a lot of work in the public sector and adoption of AI, talking a lot about AI literacy, AI fluency, and not fearing AI, looking at
Yeah.
it from a productivity point of view. And the other thing I want to highlight here, particularly because the domain we work within
Mhm.
requires interdisciplinary skills. It requires people who can do translation. And I don't mean between languages as such, but between disciplines.
Yeah.
What was the reaction and what was the impetus? Why did you think interdisciplinary research and pedagogic activities in business schools was really important to bring people together to start talking about AI, state building, social entrepreneurship, and design thinking? What was the impetus, and then what did you see happen when you started to do this?
Important, right? So the world is about the business. The business, it's all about trade, also all about economic perspective. So when businesses tend to push forward in the form of adopting technology in their production cycle, life cycle, the change management stuff to actually become more, there is emphasis in that, right? And businesses are becoming a lot more diligent, a lot more efficient, a lot more productive, which goes along with the kind of leaders which we have now. That coincides with how the level playing ground is set aside in government perspective. You see, there are a lot of instances around the world where businesses even become so big. That means they're too big to fail, creates issues in many countries, right? And now we are seeing in different countries, this is what's a big problem is who controls the information, who controls the data, right? And this is the reason why there is a strong emphasis on having a concerted effort, a proper mechanism. How do we actually, not to control, but to have a right strategy and processes to ensure this is protected, because ultimately civil service, public administration is for the people, right?
Mm,
So if businesses are becoming too big to fail and they start to control, things will get out of hand. So the idea is now civil service, public administration to actually take control of such information, control the markets in such a way that it's beneficial and inclusive for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only for an exclusive group of people, because there is, I mean, we are talking about 60% of the world population still living at a middle income and low level income, right?
Yes.
Even 70%. So there's a big gap. And especially now with technology jumping up the scale, these people are going to be pushed down the scale ladder further and further. So the only way to balance out the whole entire activity is to ensure public administration is ready to actually hold a certain process so that they level up the playing field. This is very important at the moment.
I think so too. And skilling, uh, the labor force, the future labor force, to be able to act in an interdisciplinary way, understand things. So if they're technologists, they can make sense of something
Yes.
fundamental in economics. If they're an economist, they don't fear technology. Um, and this emphasis, I mean, we call it public interest technology at Arizona State University, but the state building, the social entrepreneurship to try and get innovation occurring at grassroots.
And
Um,
remember, economics, business is all about data,
yeah.
right? This is something which was pretty much embodied in the way I brought about my mindset. Because you
Mm,
worked on economics, you already worked on international business ideas. So when being in a dean of the business school, I saw a big
yes.
loophole. A lot of these business kids, economists, don't have
Yes.
the innovation perspective. And this is where I put a full-on effort to bring in the idea of AI, understanding AI,
Mm-hmm.
understanding the application in the business school, and became a huge success in Central Asia, right? And that's very important. Now that's where the US and in Australia, the idea of data science, the basics are being brought into the first year courses for economies and businesses because there's a concerted emphasis and the exponential growth in technology has forced systems or even education modules to actually be adaptive now.
Thank you so much for that. It mirrors exactly what I believe in. I was recently at the Toulouse Business School in France, and we were talking about the importance of interdisciplinarity when it comes to addressing global challenges and other emergent principled innovations. So thank you so much for that opening introduction. I wanted to go back and ask you now, in your role as a consultant, what
Mhm.
does your business do and how do you fit into the ecosystem?
Okay. So at the moment, being a AI and Foresight person together at a couple of team of work with, the idea is now to actually look into ways how governments, because I work a lot with governments and civil societies, to look at how their economic progress and socio-economic status are going to be looked at in the next 5 to 10 years, right?
Hmm.
So I can bring up the example of Laos because I'm working a lot on Laos at the moment. We are trying to build the next 10 years report, the 5 years report, where how do AI come about into their system? At the moment,
Yes.
we are consistently seeing reports which talk about the basics of economics and social HDI index and everything. One of the big factors which is missing is AI because AI is creating a level playing field for the low and high income earners because that's open. B, creating more job opportunities for the younger generations, even without going into the workforce, right?
Hmm.
C, and governments as civil service, which I said, are losing touch with these unsung heroes of AI in the world. That is the younger generation. And
Yes.
and fourthly, the older generation are not even in the picture. So these are issues which I see in Laos, right? When we build, and our aim is basically to actually narrow this gap so that the systems, the institutional setup are catered for this development push forward, right?
Hmm.
We institutions are very crucial. Without institutions, we are never going to have a sustained progress. So the state, the institutions, the appropriate processes have to be set up so that when we look 5 years down the road, we have catered for every possible angle to guide the country towards a better standard moving forward. As at the moment, it's really fragmented. And AI has created the fragmentation because the rich is getting further richer, the poorer
Yes.
are getting poorer, governments are becoming also fragmented because the institutions are not being strong enough, a lot of fragmentation within the political scenario. So this fragmentation is caused by AI. Now, if strong institutions become a lot more stronger, similarly, for an example, in Singapore, Singapore has a national strategy. The system is now catered for an inclusive growth, and hence all the rest of the blocks and puzzles are put in play. And this is very crucial, simply because of AI and technology itself, nothing else, right? So this is what we are doing at the moment in terms of the way we build the whole idea of incorporating policy development in AI, in the AI direction.
It's so promising because on interviewing different people uh, from newly industrialized nations or those undergoing rapid global development, we are hearing the same thing. There are multiple digital divides now. It's not just do you have access to the internet or not. It's so much more than that today. It's so much more complex. And for a country to develop rapidly, the acquisition of these new technologies seem to be integral to that process. So good luck on that ongoing work with Laos. Would
Mhm.
love to see where that goes in 5 years' time. And here to say, you've almost already answered this question, but the relationship between being a strategic policy foresight consultant and technology impact assessment. Do you do TIAs or do you dabble in the area of assessment or different types of assessments?
Yeah, yeah, we do actually. For instance, the purpose of bringing the TIA into the picture, it might not be clearly stated because that was not the purpose of the
Mm-hmm.
but it is hidden in the subtly in the whole system, right? Because it kind of we can anticipate the second and tier order effects technologies, right, on society, governance, labor markets, and public services. For instance, for a 5-year plan, we certainly brought in the TIS support scenarios, right? Building and informing tech trends, requiring policy action, regulatory innovation, and investment in skills. So
Yes.
TIA is a very big term, like AI being a big terminology. TIA is a very big terminology. Obviously, showing it to the Laos government, that will be a big mind changer, a blow up thinking, what exactly are we learning? So the idea
Yes.
is to actually subtly package it so that they understand whatever the TIA framework is already incorporated in the foresight thinking itself. So that's, for instance, if it's a public sector decision making in that scenario, right? The
Yes.
TIA provides a structured way to assess risks, opportunities, ethical implication of AI, system level impacts of adopting new technologies. This is the main purpose, right? And this is the
Mm-hmm.
larger framework of the TIA. So we are now responsible to guide responsible tech adoption in governments, right?
Yes.
Such as EdTech, AI governance, digital infrastructure roles, right? Rollouts. Because like in countries like Korea, even in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
Singapore, Malaysia, there's lots of efforts to roll out e-services. Why? Because that's where the inclusive government is going to take place, right? So, but then there is a big implication. Rolling out mean you're going to have a lot of sensitive, you might even be misguided by misrepresenting and biasness also, right? So we want to stop that. So when you're rolling out, you have a consistent effort in the way you look at this adoption is undertaken. And that's our role actually, right? When we talk about AI adoption in government services, and TIA is subtly packaged in the system.
It's amazing to talk about the onus and responsibility that's required in doing this in a mindful way. Um,
Mhm.
you've almost described TIA as a tool within Foresight Consulting. Um, number one, would you say that's accurate, or do you use other synonyms to describe the TIA process? Are there
Uh,
differences? Do you do anything that's different?
yeah, so we can say technology foresight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Names like technologies foresight, techno social assessment. right? Uh,
Yes.
Ethical impact assessment, right?
Yes.
There are a few things I was thinking. Socio-technical analysis, right?
Yes.
Because people understand simple things. When you say technology impact assessment, what are we assessing? Is it technology? Are we so we are? I'm trying to break it down in such a way that governments or society can understand. Regulatory impact assessment is the other one, right? So when we talk about such synonyms, it's packaged in such a way that when the
Hmm.
strategic idea of why we are doing this is incorporated in the picture. Like even we have a terminology, digital impact assessment, right? Because we are rolling out products or even ideas which actually affects, right? So we're talking about digital rights, digital governance. So
Yes.
the aim is basically to be very aware of such terminologies, people, because different society, different governments look at it in a different way, right? So that's
Yes.
the reason why the synonyms are very important, how we bring it to the thing.
And for you, given how you've positioned TIA among other assessment uh, tools and the fact that you're a Foresight consultant, is there a basic definition you provide to people about TIA? What do you summate it to be?
Uh, I would look at five main areas when we define TIA. That is, it's a structured process to evaluate potential effects, right? Both positive and negative. Technology on society, the economy, environment, and governance. So it helps decision makers to participate and manage the consequences of adopting or regulating new and emerging technologies. So there are six things: social impact, economic impact, environmental impact, ethical, legal impact, and finally, institutional impact. These five forces have to be adopted in the TIA definition, right? Any one of these missing would actually break up the entire idea of what the TIA is all about.
Go back again to your pedagogic activities in the business schools, and I try to home in this same message to many business school leaders. And you are a dean, so you're in a position of power where you could enable this, but many of the probably tier one institutions are hesitant to
Mm,
move away from the traditional business focus.
mm,
But
mm,
to me, this is the new business world we live in, and we can't ignore it. But
yeah.
you go back to state building, social entrepreneurship, design thinking. I find these interesting, um, particularly with respect to your definition on TIA and the emphasis on the socio-technical or technical social, however you see it. If we start to look at the things that you were instilling in the university
Mhm,
structure, and then
mhm,
this notion of peace and stability. What's
mhm.
the relationship in your mind and your heart? Because I can see this already as a foresight consultant. You're looking at the long-term sustainability, but what is it in your world that TIA has a role to play in the context of peace and stability?
Okay, yeah. It is very crucial at this juncture and age and what's happening at the moment which is coincidental in the way this interview is happening and the idea of TIA is coming in, right?
Yes.
Because we are trying to identify potential sources of conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exclusion and unintended harm. So, and what has happened in this current day and time, and when we are thinking about it, a lot of data is actually being used, right? And it creates a lot of the idea is to it creates a lot of issues, which means the aim of the TIA when we talk about it in this state of affairs is that it prevents social fragmentation, right? Social fragmentation. That means it ensures, TIA ensures technology doesn't exacerbate these inequalities. Again, goes back to the initial chat we had, right?
Yes.
Discrimination and digital device supports in what you call inclusive governance, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no sides taken by the government because the government is for the people who elected them, right? So it ensures participatory decision making about technologies that affect livelihood and rights, individual rights, right? Society rights. Next, we have what you call anticipated conflict risk because we are never going to be in an environment which is going to be safe like what we thought used to be, right? It's going to have a lot of fragmentation. So to anticipate such conflict and risk, which identify how resilience, how misinformation, which is a very powerful thing which is happening now, misinformation, uh,
Yes.
job displacement could lead to unrest or distrust, right? Promoting ethical innovation, right? This is where my aim is to actually have ethical information because it aligns technology deployment with human rights,
Hmm.
justice, and peaceful development goals. Last but not least, reinforces institutional resilience, right? If institutions are very resilient, and you have seen in a lot of countries in Asia, right? It ensures governments can respond wisely to tech-driven disruption in security, communication, and service delivery. So these are things we kind of like see in the foresight scenario itself when we start to actually understand the question, where are the impact factor? Why do you do this? Right. And through our exercises, our workshops, we realize these are things which starts to prop up, right? Social media is a big player here, right? Because of social media, and if there is no proper appropriate control on social media, and especially when we use technology with civil society, there's going to be a huge distrust, a misunderstanding, and it's going to
Hmm.
get a lot. So it's a chain reaction when one of these starts to actually falter, right? And that's the reason why these five key points are very important. Why we actually discuss this in foresight strategy itself to support peace and stability.
I love those five key points you've made. I also see the interdependencies between each.
Mhm,
They're highly meshed. I wanted to focus on one of the things that you talked about, which was public participation in these
mhm.
processes and why you think that's important in technology impact assessments, especially when we think about peace and stability. Why is the public participation such an important criteria?
It's very important because when you are developing a particular policy, if you exclude public, then why are you, what is the purpose of even having such a policy, right? So,
Hmm.
for instance, without the TIA, platforms are introduced without understanding and the role of reviving old tensions, right? You create policies and you're going to create issues.
Hmm.
Misinformation, there is no control on information itself. Trust in the institution is going to be eroded. So, and voice violence starts to re-emerge. So by having TIA appropriately developed, it becomes a proactive, not as opposed to a reactive scenario, right? Which means
Yes,
it removes the idea of risk of inciting division through numbering, which is algorithmic biasness or
yes.
amplification, right? It also, the local stakeholders are consulted, appropriately adapting it to moderation in the policies, right? How do we build policies so that it includes everyone as opposed to being exclusive, right?
Hmm.
The legal framework is not also challenged because as technology grows, right, the legal framework has to also start to adapt. If
Yes.
one doesn't follow the others simultaneously, you're going to be again fragmented. So that's why the idea of civil society needs to be engaged closely so that the whole online discourse and building digital literacy could be actually narrowed. Civil society is more aware and they understand. So we are finding a peaceful resolution in policy development, application of technology, and a long-term kind of understanding through such peace building.
And I think, Dr. Jaya, that that specific aspect of long-term views,
Mm.
rather than the short-term gains, which are on most private corporations' minds,
Yeah.
from quarter to quarter, if not shorter time periods of reporting, is really essential when it is looking at the long-term effects of technology on people.
Yeah.
Tell me something on the point of institutions and the people.
Mhm.
How can we bring that what looks to me at times to be a big chasm. Um, how can we bring these closer together? At ASU, for many, many years, maybe 2 decades even, we've been trying to create new tools to
Mhm.
to be able to garner what people are thinking, what people want, and of course, sometimes people don't know what they want. But how
Mhm.
can we bring society closer to the institution that governs them? What kinds of approaches can we use? I know that's a fairly complex question, but what mechanisms might work?
I mean, from a foresight perspective, right? From a foresight perspective, there are several mechanisms you can look at, right? Because these are critical emerging technologies. Now, how do you bring civil society and individuals together and institutions together? Is um, putting them all in the same room, right? Thinking about it, right? You be very selective instead of being biased, have selective people from representative groups, right? Putting them
Yes.
in the room, asking key things, the criteria, right? The transformative potential, that's a criteria, right? The technology could significantly reshape sectors, systems, societies, and views. So first criteria to look at is the transformational potentiality here. Next, what is the majority and trajectory aspect of this setup? That is the early stage or rapidly evolving, or often not yet commercialized or regulated. Right. So they have to understand what's happening now. How do we go about defining the use of it? Right. The next, the cross-sector relevance. Right. You got multiple domains. Right. So civil society is always going to say, hey, AI is now in our park. How are we going to deal with health? How are we going to do with education? What about defense? So there's a lot of, and finance also, banking needs. These are all important questions because civil societies become a lot more educated, knowledgeable. They're going to be actually touching base on all the various perspective and self-interests itself. So these are also risk and uncertainty, right? Everyone is looking forward to a longer term, right? So when you start to look at long term, the risk and uncertainty are supremely exponential. So let's bring back that onto the table, right? That's important. And the main player in this scenario is AI, data, right? This is very crucial, right? And this is why civil society is ready to sit down with the policy builders, right? The stakeholders to understand how businesses, how civil, social enterprises, how individuals, right? And statement, right? Leaders could actually join together, understand how there is a concerted effort to move forward the ball from a short term, medium term to a long term perspective. If any one of these is kind of like left out, the end product is a dysfunctional society, right? And we have seen it even in a country like Singapore, right? Because it's a very multicultural society. Hence, there is always going to be pots of issues which are going to come out. And that's the reason why there is going to be, we have to bring such people, right, civil society, onto the table for discussion, right? What are we looking for in the next 5 to 10 years, right? Why can't we do this? The question of how, why, and for what has to be answered, right? That's the way I look at things here.
That's beautiful. I often tell people, you know, civil society is made up of people who are also regulators in their day job and also members of underrepresented minorities and so much more. I think that's a wonderful response, and that leads very much into methodologies uh, to undertake technology impact assessments, what criteria you're looking at. You already mentioned a few of these. Could you tell us more? What in your mind, are the criteria and methods used in technology impact assessment?
So for instance, you do a horizon scanning, they call it, right? You have horizon scanning where you look at databases, startups, military tech. So you got tools like Scopus and ARXIV, WIPO, and all. So that's what we start to actually look at. What is the chatter all about? Right? What is the chatter? Right? As a foresight consultant, when applying AI, we look at what is the chatter all about. Then we run a Delphi panels, right? So we have focus group, right? Workshop, technologies, policymakers. So we have brought the whole entire system into a simple table, right? And then we do the assessment on environmental scanning and weak signal. What are the signals which are weak, right? Which means tracking issues at the research labs, in open source projects, niche forums, and regional startups. So you see, you have a step-by-step guide to narrow down the issues, what are the weak signals, what requires attention, and then developing the technology to roadmap. And when we talk about doing these steps, the key question is, you can't solve everything in one go, right? Aim is to what is the most immediate impact to society, right? That's the question here. If it's to do with reducing or meeting SDG goals, then what exactly are the SDG goals, right? Then once you identify the development timeline, the investment trends and policy gaps are narrowed down, right? And then lastly, what we do is an impact and uncertainty matrix, like a 2x2. What is the low impact? Like what I said, right? You can't solve everything in one go. Definitely, there are very critical things, issues that need to be solved, right? In a developing world is usually education and health, right? Or even gender biasness, right? How do we get more women into the system, right? A lot of countries which have negated women are actually bearing the negative effects now. So a lot of the middle income countries are now forcing to look, how do we bring women into the system? How do they contribute to the economic development, social development? Technology is one of the key players, right? As I said from the start, it is one which is actually leveling the playing field for every single country, right? At
Hmm.
any rates of growth, right? So that's important. Then you do a scenario testing, right? You put in different future scenarios, societal trends and policies, environments. While doing the scenario trends, we will know whether is society, or if a particular society is ready for that in that particular time era, right? So for instance, if you look at identifying any of this example, you look at security, right? If within the next 5 to 10 years, even at the present moment, quantum computing is going extremely wild now. The cryptography, the autonomous weapons, or self-driving, quantum computing is taking over now.
Hmm.
Look at it. Who is involved in it, right? Do we have more women participating in such decision making? Very limited, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So these are some of the key important things we need to kind of like set our foot in when we start to build this methodology, right? Once we have a appropriate adaptable methodology, we can start to actually look at issues one by one instead of the whole scenario, right? Because you can
Yes.
never do that. And being practical and pragmatic, what do you call professor itself, or calling me, or a course
Yes.
psychologist, we know we can't solve everything in one day, but we know we can solve at least one that actually raises society's standards itself. That's the key
Hmm.
story. Yep.
Could I ask, on what you said, 2 points? One of the questions I have is this process in your mind linear? It's iterative? What is it? You described it as steps, but in your mind, uh, is some of it sequential, like the horizon scanning? We have to start with that. But the other things you just go back to periodically. How does it work?
It's a very iterative process. It's never just linear 1, 2, 3. Why? Because we live in a world which is so uncertain. So being iterative, it destroys our whole process. So
Yes.
we have to be iterative. Every step might take longer than expected, but those steps are required to
Yes.
actually keep discussions flowing, at the same time adaptive. And we have a human in the loop, right? The states are there to they are the ones who are there to actually look if do we detract from what we are looking at, right? So
Hmm.
having an AI is great, application, discussion, peace building, but human in the loop is very important, because ultimately decision makers have to understand what is possible and what is not possible, what is available, what is not available, right? And if it's within their capacity, right? And if
Yes.
not,
Yes.
how do you start to actually source for that capacity, right? So this is
Yes.
important. That's how I look at it. It's very iterative.
Okay. Thank you. A quick question now. What are weak signals for people listening and who've never heard the term before? What do you think weak signals are in conversation with others?
Okay. So when you talk about strong signals, right, you are talking about labor development policies and so forth. The weak signal is what are the skill sets, right? That's the signal, right? Oh, we need to build strong AI related workforce. Now, the civic signal is uh, do you already have educations set up to build that skills? That's a weak signal. You don't get that much, right? So that's
Yes.
why weak signals are very critical because that gives us a source of opportunity to tackle such problems before they become a huge issue, right? And this is something we as Foresight we look for because weak signals gives us the strength to source for help, right? That's how I put it itself. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's critical, I think, for people seeing it as an opportunity, right? It's a challenge and an opportunity, weak signals, where if we develop that capability in our country, in our location, in that particular project, we will achieve greater things.
Mm.
Talk to us about the kinds of stakeholders you've had to interact with when conducting technology impact assessments, Dr. Jaya.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of them actually. Probably I'll just highlight a few. Obviously, the key prime people would be government and policymakers, right? Because they are the ones who are designing, regulating, adopting, ensuring alignment. So with the national goals and not only national, international goals, because a lot
Hmm.
of countries like Singapore, Malaysia, they're taking up a lot of international responsibilities, right? They're becoming mediators. So it's no longer just national, the global economy is now very integrated. Problems in one area is going to affecting small nation states. So policy and government stakeholders are very important here. And next, because it's technology, we need to talk about technology developers and providers. That's very important, right? Regulators and legal experts. So government is government. There are also regulators, right? The institutions which regulate and legal framework. So this is crucial. Then obviously we bring in the people and civil society, right? Then of course the others part of the story, which is like a subset, right? We look at stakeholders will be academic and researchers, affected communities, and end users. Why? Like earlier on, I said the gender biasness is still so strife around, right?
Yes.
So we need to also consider these are sectors, although they can be major players, but these are things which take time to know where they are located. Then, of course, the foresight, innovation, and international organization, because as you see, developing countries, a lot of NGOs are participating, and that's where the strong amount, the what you call the key amount of data is coming, because NGOs have global standard comparative rights, right? Insights. So they have to be part of this whole stakeholder discussion. So government, technology, regulators, civil society, I put it as the big blocks itself. Then the rest will be the subsidiary, which starts to affect. So this is how I look at things in terms of who are the main stakeholders itself.
Fantastic. That's a really good summary, by the way, without going into too much depth, because I know you could have spoken on each of these levels a
Yeah.
great deal, but that's a wonderful summary. Um, in terms of when you practically go out to do a technology impact assessment, is there a guide you look for? Is there a rubric? Are there essential elements that we need to address in a TIA?
Yeah. When we, so again, going back how I look at foresight, we have a certain style of doing it. Similarly, when we do have a TIA, we also have a certain guide because we don't want to be misplaced or misguided due to the amount of
Mm.
information we have. So we have to have it credible, right? That's why we have to, because people are asking, what are you basing your assessment with? Right. So obviously you need to have a guide. So it's to be creditable, be repeatable, and inclusive, right? Because technology impact assessment is inclusive and iterative, right? It just can't stay forever the way. So things like, context definition. What are you defining here? That's very important. Then we go about stakeholder mapping. Who will be involved? Who are the key people who have the highest say on this assessment itself? Then impact dimensions. When we talk about impact dimensions, I think I told earlier on about the 5 different things, right? Social, economic, environmental, legal, ethical, and institutions, right? So these are the impact dimensions. So it's like step 1, step 2, step 3. Then what are the risk and harm, right? By doing something or trying to what you call set up some policy design, what are the impact and harm? Then we followed by equity. Did our development biased anyone? right? What is the harm? Did we push the misrepresented someone? So the whole equity and inclusion lens is very important. Primarily the so-called low-income group, the aged group, the women. These are all groups which are very what you call at a state of vulnerability. So did we remove them from this assessment? Then you got the data and the privacy assessment. Mitigation. How do you mitigate such problems, the risks, and so on. And last but not least, who is accountable and in this governance? Accountability is one very important, powerful thing. Although it's ranked in the last, it's there to ensure what we are doing is actually accountable. Because in this day and age, a lot of things in the global world is not accountable. Nobody's taking responsibility for that. So technology impact assessment, we have to have the idea of governance and accountability so that policy design becomes valuable.
So relate that, Dr. Jaya, to the effectiveness. So maybe a government sponsors a technology impact assessment to be conducted.
Mhm.
And you would talk about accountability of the outcomes of the TIA. What's the effectiveness? How does the government take that information and then do something with it?
Um, if you look at it, you can separate between the strengths and the gaps, right? And then when you consult with experts, you can see how they engage with those key stakeholders like the developers, academics, and regulators. Now, the common gaps, why we look at that is that it often excludes civil society, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, when you assess, you're going to, there is always going to be this lopsided issue, right? Marginalized communities and peace builders. So when you're consulting with expert, that's the negative gap of the whole thing. Similarly, when you talk about policy framework, you're going to have some form of weak enforcement, lack of alignment, right? Similarly, instead of talking about the strengths, I'm talking about the weakness because that's the weak signal, right? We are trying to actually aid in our discussion. Then transparency and communication. Yes, we know we can create transparency, but engagement from top down can actually lead to a problem, right? That's important. So I'm focused on actually when we discuss about this TIA, what are the weaknesses which can actually create? Can we start to cover such weaknesses? And last but not least, integration with peace and stability goals. One of the problem when we say yes, we can going to do it with multilateral initiatives, the gaps which are going to come in is rarely framed explicitly around social cohesion, trust, or conflict sensitivity, right? That's how do we kind of like cement that, right? So these are some of the gaps while we look at effectiveness. These are some of the gaps we're going to actually come across. Yeah. Okay, so when we discuss about TIA, obviously people will start to say, oh, this is great, this is good, this is what we need to do. But my aim is to what are the weak signals we are trying to cover?
Hmm.
What is
Yes.
going to come up from this strength, right? And that's why I was going down step by step when you're consulting with experts, we obviously going to say we're going to exclude civil society, marginalized communities, because we're talking to experts, for instance. Similarly, when you're talking about transparency and communication, yes, our policy regulators are going to have more transparency, accountability, but the engagement is top down, right? So
Yes.
there is going to be mismatch in the event when we start. So the aim is to actually not just talk about the strengths, but when we're talking to consultants or in terms of the kind of aspects we are looking at, look at the negative aspect of things because that's what grows into a problem when we establish policies and so on and so forth, right? For
Hmm.
instance, we're talking about multi-stakeholder platforms, great. Interministerial working groups and all exist, fantastic. But the problem is coordination with grassroots voices is missing, right? Youth, very important. Informal sectors which are highlighted because technology is leveling the playing field for everybody. Their voices are never going to be part of the current strength we are looking at. So this is why I say we have to focus on the common gaps and limitations. Whilst we know that it's positive, this has to be strengthened. Why? This is the key to how technology impact assessments can become a very strong policy decision making.
Yes, it's the very reason I talk about academia getting closer to other stakeholders and working hand in hand with them, because
Yeah.
otherwise their academic work really is just for academia and not for practice, right?
Yeah.
So I commend you on that. Um, with regards to this, how do you think TIA should evolve in a technology's life cycle? So we can talk about a critical emerging technology. Okay, we've defined that technology. Where do we start with TIA? When do we inject it?
Um, the whole life cycle is very interesting because it's a very long drawn process, right? So it evolves. So this whole life cycle evolves alongside what do you call it has to adapt to
Mhm.
changes because it matures. It adopts there is adoption rate itself, the risk and societal effects. So the type or and depth of such assessment goes in several manner, right? So first is R&D, right? So it can be lab-based, innovation, early concept, startups, right? How do we anticipate TIA in ethical foresight, right? So the focus in how. Now, the key question to answer this will be, what are the future impacts likely? Like the design, decision, and embedding values, such as privacy and equity.
Mhm.
So that's like the R&D when you're doing R&D. And goes back to my certification in designing a AI product, right? That's the question we have to ask. Why is this technology being built? What purpose?
Yes.
Is it valued? Are there ethical standards, right? So this is question. Then the next cycle is the prototype and piloting, right? So the key question we answer here is, who is included and excluded, right? How does this particular prototype or pilot can emerge as a harmful effect, right? Is it transparent to the entire system, right? So that's the prototype and piloting of testing. I'm not talking about the typical or focus. I'm talking about the question when you go through this life cycle, right? Then scaling and commercial, right? Because we're talking about life cycle, we have to scale it up eventually. So the aim is what are there any unintended consequences emerging from
Mhm.
such technology, right? Or such decision making, right? Are regulatory or legal gaps exposed? That's important because this is where data starts to spill into wrong hands, issues or tech. Uh, how do we actually handle that? And who benefits most out of this? Or least out of these, right? So this is one. Then we move on to institutionalization and mainstream use. That's the entire society itself. Now, is it backed by public interest? Did we actually get interest from the public, right? Or over time? If you don't, then there's going to be an issue. The whole purpose of this is a failure. Feedback loops there. So that's important, right? It's not like a linear thing, right? Every junction there is checks and balances, right? So the feedback loops are in place. Or is there reassessment? Is there a possibility of reassessment of such tech, right? How resilient is tech for future shocks? In doing such assessment, how resilient it is, right? And last but not least, how do you decommission or transit, right? That
Yes. Yes.
what are the lessons to inform future development of TIAs? Because as we already understood that it's adaptable, it's iterative. So one TIA policy might not be well developed, but when building successive, what are the lessons learned from the previous TIAs, right? When we start to actually iterate. So are there lasting social, ethical, or environmental consequences? We never talked about the environment, but environment is a very big player here. Climate change and all this is going to affect such decision making, technology itself. So how do we ensure a just transition in this situation, incorporating even environmental consequences? So these are the life cycle stages of a TIA, I would say, right, over time, and how this evolution does matter to peace and stability as risks start to emerge later throughout the life cycle, right? Such as mass surveillance, once benign infrastructure, all this is happening, right? Similarly, inclusion and trust. This life cycle also has to adopt this because we need regular re-evaluation and each one of these because we're asking such questions, right? And how this tech across cultures, languages, or geographies, because there is no limitation how AI or tech is playing its part itself. There is no restriction, right? And lastly, policies and laws itself. How does TIA bridge this gap, right, to the decision makers, right? If we don't have appropriate policies, then the TIA is dysfunctional, right? It's important, right? So this is how I look at the whole life cycle effectiveness of the TIA itself.
This has been an incredibly enlightening interview, Dr. Jaya. It's obvious that you're engaged in the practice of TIA through your Foresight consulting. It also is very obvious to me you've been a hardcore researcher in the past, and the dean's background is obvious in the business schools in Central Asia. So, um, you know, there's a lot to say about the thoroughness of your approach and the practice of your approach, and that it's been born out of academic research, really. And you've refined these skills over time, over, at least 15 years of practice and research. Um, I want to point to the many awards that you've received and contributed to. It's pretty awesome to see this, and also your humility as a as an academic. It's really important when we're dealing with these big uh, projects and processes that this humility comes through, given the so many unknowns there are in relatedness to the work and the humongous nature of the problems that you're challenged with.
Mhm.
Um, I have several questions, and there's an approach that I think we need to take because we haven't finished our interview. But the questions that were outstanding were whether you think TIA can be done jointly with other nation states, whether there are opportunities and hindrances towards bilateral or multilateral TIA, whether there were shortcomings of technology impact assessment, or if it could be misused as a tool for someone's gain, whether you would rebrand TIA in some other terminology, and whether you had anything to add to the interview.
So if you want to think
My
about
internet.
can it be done, uh, conducted in a joint manner, it is possible, right? It's possible. It involves multiple stakeholders across sectors, both valuable and increasingly necessary. Why? Is because it ensures diverse perspectives, knowledge systems, values are included in this evaluation of technology impact, especially when it stakes involve peace, equity, or public trust, right? So there are 6 plausible so-called processes for conducting a joint TIA. So the adaptable process works well in government, foresight labs, multi-stakeholder settings, and is suitable for use in our public officials, especially in development or peace building contexts itself. So for instance, right, if I lay out a couple of steps, that is A, convene a multidisciplinary working group. The participants are usually government officials, technology, civil society, affected communities, academics, private sector, and legal and ethical experts. The main goal here is a shared purpose. Since we are doing a joint assessment, there is shared purpose, the timeline and the scope for the TIA, as opposed to a singularly attempted approach, right? So for instance, example, a task force formed to assess the societal impacts of AI-driven public benefits allocation in rural areas. This is one of the questions you can start off with, right? When you're developing multidisciplinary working group. Next, we go ahead defining the technology and the context. Basically, there has to be some kind of agreement when we talk about technology is and what it does, where it is being deployed or planned, which population groups are impacted. So we could use tools like technology canvas or problem tree analysis. And then the step 3 will be to map the domains and stakeholders which are impacted. We can explore social, legal, economic, environmental, and security dimensions. The stakeholder mapping ensures voices of youth, women, minorities, or vulnerable groups, which are also intentionally included because we need to develop a more inclusive process. And the methods will be empathy mapping, participatory systems mapping, or future wills. These are some methods we can use when we are talking about impacting domain and stakeholders. Fourthly, we could actually facilitate dialogues and evidence gathering, right? So we could use focus groups, expert panels, surveys, and scenario workshops. Things which surfaces certain concerns in this particular facilitation will be things like bias or exclusion risks, potential social unrest, data privacy, and power asymmetries, right? This is important. and it incorporates local knowledge because you don't want to have only a singular top-down assessment. You want to incorporate more on the ground. So we got local knowledge, foresight tools, and real-life case studies. Fifthly, we could look at co-developing mitigation measures, right? How do we redesign, regulate, restrict aspects of technology, right? When we say restrict, it's not to restrict technology totally, but restrict it for harmful use. All right. So we develop governance frameworks, public communication plans, and monitoring indicators. The priority is on equity, trust, and long-term resilience. Resilience is a very powerful thing, right? And finally, how do you institutionalize, bring together all this as a feedback and a learning mechanism, these steps, right? That is to create a living document or TIA report shared across sectors, shared across the stakeholders, which we brought together, right? And plan for periodic reiteration, assessment, post-deployment, mechanism for grievance and redressing, and integrate it with the planning and or procurement processes, right? So if I throw out of the 6 steps, let me throw out an example of a case which we used. That is, a joint TIA can be used on biometrical digital ID in a fragile state, right? So here the stakeholders will be Ministry of Interior, data protection agencies, refugee representatives, humanitarian NGOs, technology and peace building actors. And the aim is the outcome of such a joint TIA would be a delayed rollout until legal safeguards and data ownership policies are co-designed with the civil societies so that it's strong, it's stable, it's accountable, it's trusted, and easily used, right? So this is important. Now, your question with regards to what are the shortcomings, right? What are the opportunities and hindrances towards such bilateral relation? As I said, you can build TIAs jointly, but there are going to be certain hindrances, some positives and opportunities which come out, right? The shortcomings. So some of this is where when we are actually undertaking cross-border bilateral and multilateral TIAs, we anticipate shared risk and shape collective governance, right? So we can actually align strategies across nations or what you call nations itself, prevent conflict, promote more responsible innovation, especially around the dual use of emerging technologies itself. So for instance, because of the infiltration of AI and tech in everyone's daily lives, such as AI, drones, surveillance tech, biotech, all this needs to be considered. We need to consider its uses, the goods and the bads out of it. So in terms of talking about the opportunities for bilateral and multilateral TIA, I'm going to kind of highlight a few of those, right? So for instance, we could talk about capacity sharing. Countries with more mature regulatory ecosystems can support lower capacity states, right? Through co-assessment, technical assistance, and knowledge transfer. Similarly, harmonization of standards, that's important, right? Enables alignments on ethics, safety, data governance, AI regulation. So example, EU, ASEAN, UAE, OECD, right? Trust building and diplomacy is important since we are talking about TIA and with relevance to peace and stability building. We can have a joint TIA process that can serve as a platform for peace building, regional trust, or digital non-aggression pacts. Inclusive regional foresight, multilateral ITIAs can feed into regional development plans, digital compacts, and climate tech coordination. And last but not least, we can also have a prevention of tech-driven tensions. Anticipatory assessments can help to avoid arms races, surveillance creep, or digital exclusion that can escalate the conflict. Also, just another on that note, there are shared risk and global spillovers. So many tech impacts, such as misinformation, digital surveillance, cyber weapons, transcend national boundaries. That's why joint TIAs can actually help to manage these, right? So there are several opportunities which I kind of like highlighted. Then on the other side of the story, flip side of the coin is that there are going to be definite hindrances to bilateral and multilateral TIAs. That is national security concerns, you got regulatory asymmetry, political mistrust or tensions, resource capacity gaps. why low-income countries may lack tools, staff, or foresight capabilities to fully participate. You have corporate and IP protection, lack of institutional mandates. That is because there are no binding requirements for countries to assess emerging tech impacts jointly, leading to fragmented efforts, right? Cultural normative differences. What is considered ethical or harmful varies according to political systems, tradition, and values. So there are several hindrances to bilateral and multilateral TAs, which I kind of highlighted. So maybe as a electric, what do you call illustrative example, I could say UNESCO and African Union, there's a lot of collaboration around AI ethics, digital inclusion assessment, right? EU US Trade and Technology Council is one of them, and ASEAN Digital Master Plan is another. These are some examples which actually where joint development of TIA is happening. Now, for instance, how could we then rebrand? The question when you said, how do we actually rebrand the TIA itself, right? Prior to that, thinking about the situation, when we took look at how could it be rebrand, is basically to clarify its purpose, right? More directly to the societal goals itself, simply because TIA has to be inclusive. Hence, societal goals are a key part of the story, such as peace, trust, inclusion, or innovation ethics, right? A good name to convey in this is not just about assessment, but it's more about anticipating, shaping, and stewarding technology in the public's interest. So when we want to rebrand, there are several ways we can look at it. Like what I did for defining how do we, the synonyms of a TIA here, some of the nuances which TIA can consider is technology, foresight, and ethics. Why? Because with TIA is about technology. So the rationale is to emphasize the anticipation, not just reaction, more proactive, and centers ethical values. Maybe another term could be RTA, so responsible tech assessment. Here highlights the accountability and responsibility, especially for public trust. Another way of looking at it is HCTR, that is human-centered tech review. That means puts people and societal well-being at the core of the process so that people become more accepting of TIAs. And societal impact assessments, societal tech impact reviews, tech peace and stability check, public interest technology scan, anticipatory tech governance, which why I say anticipatory, because it's more proactive, right? So anchors the process in proactive and participatory governance. So in terms of certain rebranding, this is how I would call it itself. Yes, I mean, to keep the whole idea of TIA, we need to actually continue the word assessment, because it's about assessing a particular tech and it's used within a society itself. So many practitioners find it very technical evaluative. So there is always a one-time audit rather than a dynamic, inclusive strategic process. So it could shift, rebrand could shift towards more of a foresight, dialogue, stewardship, navigation, and co-design, right? So the TIAs, the aim is to, well, if there is a need to rebrand, we should look into these 5 different kind of terminologies so that it becomes more accepting moving forward itself. When you are trying to build legitimacy, inclusion, and peace building through technology itself. In terms of when you were saying, is there any other extras, I would look at things. I would say a further thought to is that, you know, my final reflections behind is that there are common additions that practitioners and policymakers need to think about. That is, TIA is a living process, not a checkbox, right? That's very important. Why we need to treat the TIA as a continuous learning journey, not a fixed deliverable, right? So that's very important. It's a living process. It's like a human being. It's living, it's breathing, right? Next, inclusion needs to be intentional. Why I say that? That leads to success, leads to trust, that leads to a lot more congenial, more appropriateness within the civil society. Right? We talk about stakeholder engagement, but how do we ensure we are truly listening to the marginal voice? That's why you need to be intentional. We have to consider the cultural and political context of these matters. The TIA frameworks, right, should adapt to different governance models and value systems, right? There are no one size fits all. So it's iterative, it's inclusive intentionally, it's culturally and politically sensitive. Its equity should be central lens because everyone has to be part of it. It's not enough to ask, is tax safe? We must ask who bears, who benefits, who bears the cost, who benefits the use of the implications out of the TIA. Tech is evolving exponentially, so evolving faster than any institution can grapple on. So we need to be agile. We are on these anticipatory models that can keep up with the innovation cycle. Not all techs need to be TIA, but we more, but more do we think it is, right? So, for instance, everything doesn't have to be done through an AI, right? Uh, we have to understand what are the right questions to use TIA. So we are not always asking the right questions early enough. By the time harm is visible, the trust is hard to rebuild. So not all tech needs a TIA itself. So these are some of um, uh, things which I think I want to add to this whole TIA conversation, which is crucial, right? When we think about being policymakers, practitioners, and so forth. And then the final thought is basically the aim of this conversation is to see the gaps between policies and practice, or vision and implementation. It's very open when we start to think about it, these reflections itself. It has to be honest, systematic, and value-based insights itself. So I'd like to take an opportunity to say thank you very much for having me in this discussion about TIAs. It was really a pleasure to talk to you and offer my insights in how TIAs are a critical assessment or process when we start to think about critical emerging technologies that can be used in terms of support of peace and stability without losing the core essence of why they exist. All right. So thank you very much.
And a very big thank you to you, Dr. Jaya, for that incredible overview of technology impact assessment in your world as a Foresight consultant, a previous academic, and an entrepreneur. We thank you so much for sharing such detail, uh, which is normally not provided. And I think this was a wonderful primer for anyone who wanted to get into technology impact assessment in the way that you've described in the public interest. They could use this as a model and one that's trusted in order to progress. So we thank you for your time and your expertise. Bye for now.